Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into, well, a really complex and often shadowy subject, the triads.
Yeah, these Chinese transnational organized crime groups.
Exactly. We got a source document, triad.pdf, from one of you listeners, and we've gone through it to pull out the key stuff. Our mission today, pretty simple, give you a clear, hopefully engaging look at where they came from, what they do, how far they reach.
And maybe some connections that aren't immediately obvious. The word triad itself, it brings up all these images, right? Secret societies, hidden operations.
And that's not entirely wrong, is it?
hmm
The source says they grew out of secret societies back in, what, 18th, 19th century China?
Yeah, Greater China. And from there, they've spread, well, pretty much everywhere. Maybe we should start right at the beginning with the name.
Okay, yeah, triad. Where does that actually come from? The source says it's from Sanhihui.
Right, Three Harmony Society. It's about the harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity, a very traditional Chinese concept.
The source also mentions this other idea, probably wrong, that the British in Hong Kong made it up because of triangles in their symbols.
Yeah, that's less likely. Apparently, the term was used way earlier, like back in 1826, by a guy named William Milne, so not a British invention.
Interesting. But the really fascinating part for me from the source is that these early groups weren't primarily like criminal gangs.
Not at all. Their main goal initially was intensely nationalistic. They wanted to kick out the Qing dynasty.
The Manchus, right, seen as foreign rulers.
Exactly. They had that slogan, oppose the king and restore the Ming dynasty. It was patriotic.
It's almost the opposite of how we think of them now. Started with politics.
Uh-huh. And it shows this pattern, where political groups sometimes use these non-state actors for violence, especially when things are unstable. Blurs the lines.
And they weren't the first ones doing this kind of thing either, were they? The source talks about earlier groups, White Lotus societies.
Yeah, White Lotus Heaven and Earth Society, also called Tiandahui or Hongmen. These groups were involved in big historical events too, like the Taiping and Boxer rebellions.
So there's a long history of these kinds of societies in China.
Definitely. Often with political or even religious aspects, adapting over time. The Heaven and Earth Society seems like a key ancestor. The Triads are often described as a branch of the Hung Society, which came from the Tiandihui.
Like a family tree of secret societies, sort of.
Kinda, yeah,
Yeah.
adapting to whatever was happening historically.
Which brings us to the Republican era. Things get even messier then. The source says the Kuomintang, the KMT, they actually used the triads.
They did. Enlisted them to attack political enemies, even carry out assassinations.
Wow, talk about a dark alliance. Why would they do that? Just pragmatism and chaos.
Well, that's often how it happens in unstable times, right? When the state's weak or fighting for control, these groups have muscle, resources. Political factions need that. It blurs the line between politics and crime.
Makes a grim kind of sense.
And the Green Gang gets mentioned too, another Hung Society offshoot. They were heavily involved in that Shanghai massacre in 1927, targeting communists.
Okay, so let's fast forward. 1949, People's Republic of China is founded. What happens then?
Big crackdown. Mao Zedong and later Deng Xiaoping suppressed these secret societies pretty hard on the mainland.
So where do they go?
That forced them out, basically. They started flourishing in places like Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and also in overseas Chinese communities around the world. Remnants of the Green Gang, too.
Yeah, so the PRC founding kind of pushed them global, in a way.
In a way, yeah. But interestingly, the source points out they didn't vanish from the mainland forever after the economic reform started.
They came back.
Sort of. You see the reemergence of triads and what the source calls black societies. It makes a distinction, though.
Between what?
Between loosely organized dark forces, think local gangs, petty crime, and the more established black societies.
Okay, what makes them black societies?
They're more like traditional organized crime. They might control whole local markets like wholesale produce or getting construction permits, and often, crucially, they have protection from corrupt local officials.
Got it. So from these really tangled roots, they've spread out. The scale mentioned in the document is kind of staggering.
It really is. China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, obviously, but then all over Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea.
North America, and not just generic North America, but Brazil, Argentina are mentioned.
Right. Then Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Italy, France, Spain, even places like Romania, Bulgaria.
South Africa, Russia.
Yeah.
It's genuinely a global network.
A truly global footprint.
Does the source talk about what they mostly do in different places? Is it all the same or does it vary?
It definitely varies. The source suggests they diversify based on local opportunities. Drug trafficking is big globally, but,
But
well, in places with large Chinese diaspora communities, you often see more extortion, illegal gambling, protection rackets, that sort of thing.
and in developed countries.
More focus on sophisticated stuff, maybe? Financial crime, money laundering, counterfeiting, and these newer cyber frauds we're seeing.
And the list of actual crimes in the source, it's long.
Oh, yeah. Extortion, protection, murder, assault, racketeering. The classics, you might say.
But then also human trafficking, sex trafficking, illegal gambling, loan sharking.
Counterfeiting, too, and it specifically mentions hitting the Hong Kong and Taiwanese film and music industries with copyright infringement, plus kidnapping, robbery, money laundering.
Arms trafficking, healthcare fraud, immigration fraud. It just keeps It's a massive portfolio.
It really is.
Okay, let's maybe zoom in on one of the big ones, drug
Yeah.
trafficking. A long history there, right? Back to the opium trade.
Way back, 19th century. Then later, they shifted heavily into heroin, especially from the Golden Triangle. The source mentions China being used as a refining hub and transit point to North America and Europe.
And specific groups are named.
Yeah, the 14K and the Big Circle Gang are highlighted as major players in the international heroin trade.
But they haven't stopped with heroin, have they? The situation now is concerning.
Extremely. Their role in the fentanyl and methamphetamine trade is a huge issue now. They're reportedly smuggling the precursor chemicals out of China
To where?
to North America, to Europe, where the final drugs are actually made. And it's not just opioids and meth. They're also getting more involved in unlicensed cannabis farms, particularly in the U.S., and trafficking ketamine.
They seem incredibly adaptable to market demands.
Highly adaptable, yes. They shift to whatever's profitable and exploits new gaps.
And hand in hand with drug trafficking usually goes money laundering.
Absolutely critical. The source states they've become key money launderers for other major groups like Mexican and Italian drug cartels.
This is a significant role.
And it gets even more complex. There are reports mentioned in the source that they're also moving money for CCP elites.
Wow. Okay, that's a major claim.
It is. And the U.S. House Select Committee, looking into strategic competition, apparently assessed that the whole opioid crisis has basically helped the Triads become, quote, the world's premier money launderers.
Premier money launderers, that's quite a statement.
And they're keeping up with the times, too. They're reportedly even laundering cryptocurrency stolen by North Korean hackers. So very sophisticated financially.
Can we get more specific? Any recent examples?
Yeah, the source mentions a big European bust called Operation China Truck. Italian police uncovered a triad network active across Italy, France, Spain, Germany,
Doing what?
all sorts. Extortion, usury, that's loan sharking, illegal gambling, prostitution, drug trafficking. It sounds like they were even targeting Chinese transport companies, shaking them down.
And they work with other groups too, not just rivals.
Definitely collaborate when it suits them. The source gives the example of the Italian Camorra.
What kind of collaboration?
Reports mention working together on human trafficking, illegal immigration, synthetic drug trafficking, laundering money through real estate deals.
And even, wait, illicit industrial waste.
Yeah, transporting it illegally from Italy to Hong Kong. A pretty disturbing partnership of convenience.
Okay, shifting slightly, counterfeiting. They've been doing that for ages too, right?
Oh, yeah. Since the 1880s, according to the source. Started with things like currency, books,
And then moved on to
watches, fake VCDs and DVDs back in the day, designer clothes. Anything with a market, basically. Always quick to jump on consumer trends.
and now, what's the modern equivalent?
Well, one really nasty recent development is pig butchering scams.
Pig butchering. That sounds awful. What is it?
It's this horrible mix of catfishing, romance scams, and investment fraud. They build trust, often romantically.
Like fattening the pig.
Exactly. Before convincing the victim to invest in fake cryptocurrency schemes and stealing everything.
That's brutal.
And it gets worse. The source highlights that the victims themselves often get trapped. They're lured overseas with fake job offers or something.
Huh.
Then they're essentially trafficked, forced by these gangs to work in fraud factories, carrying out more scams on others. It's a human trafficking nightmare hidden within the cybercrime.
God, that's grim. The scale of all this, it raises questions, doesn't it? Like, how do they operate so freely? Are there connections?
Well, this is where it gets potentially very controversial. The source does talk about historical and current reports alleging links between Triads and the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
How so? What kind of links?
Specifically mentioning the CCP's United Front work, that's their strategy to co-opt various groups to expand influence. The report suggests Triad members have acted as agents for the CCP,
Agents doing what?
intimidating critics, coercing people, both in China and abroad, especially Hong Kong, Taiwan, and diaspora communities.
Why would the CCP do that?
Plausible deniability, perhaps? Using these groups allows the state to distance itself from political warfare or influence hawks. The source quotes Martin Perbrick saying the CCP recognized the benefit of using triads this way.
Are there specific examples?
The 2019 UN Long attack in Hong Kong is cited. That's when suspected triad members attacked pro-democracy protesters, and there were accusations the police were slow to respond, suggesting collusion. The source also notes reports of triads working with local CCP officials on the mainland and getting involved in political influence campaigns in places like Palau and Fiji. And that ProPublica investigation linking overseas Chinese police stations to organized crime, it adds to the picture.
It's a disturbing picture, definitely. These are serious allegations about state actors potentially enabling or using criminal groups.
Yeah, it suggests a very murky intersection of power, politics, and crime.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. What about inside the triads? Their structure, their rituals, it sounds very elaborate.
It can be. They famously use numeric codes for ranks. The source says these are based on Chinese numerology and the I Ching.
The I Ching, the ancient divination text.
That's the one. So the numbers have symbolic meaning, like 489 is the leader, the mountain master, 426 is the enforcer, the vanguard or red pole, 49 is a regular soldier or member.
And there are other rules, too.
Yeah, like the white paper fan, 415, who's like the advisor, financial guy, and the straw sandal, 432, who handles communications and liaison stuff.
Is that structure still really rigid today, though?
Maybe not as much. The source actually quotes an expert saying the current structure is often quite vague, more of a low hierarchy. So those traditional ranks might not mean exactly the same thing everywhere now.
But the rituals persist. The initiation ceremonies.
Oh, yes. Those are described as quite significant, very traditional. There's usually an altar to Guan Yu.
The god of war and loyalty.
Right. Incense, sometimes an animal sacrifice. Drinking a mix of wine and blood to symbolize brotherhood.
Wow.
Passing under an arch of swords, reciting these 36 oaths of loyalty and secrecy, and that symbolic gesture raising 3 fingers of the left hand. It's all designed to build intense loyalty and bond members together.
And these rituals kind of tie together all these different groups that fall under the triad name.
Yeah.
Because the source stresses they aren't one single organization.
Exactly. It emphasizes they're geographically, culturally, structurally quite distinct, mostly originating from Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, different from mainland Black societies.
And the source lists a lot of different groups.
Yeah, prominent Hong Kong ones like Sun Yeon or Chu Chao Group, the 14K, various Wo groups, Luan groups, but also groups that moved elsewhere, like the Bamboo Union in Taiwan and Soon Tong in Singapore.
And those gangs in New York with names like Black Dragons, Flying Dragons, White Tigers, and the company down in Australia. It shows how dispersed they became.
Definitely. It also briefly mentions Tongs, just to differentiate them.
Right. Tons aren't the same thing.
They originated differently in immigrant Chinatowns, more like mutual aid societies initially. Not exclusively criminal, though many did get involved in crime, like extortion and gambling, but not the same political origins as early triads.
Okay. In Southeast Asia, triads have a history there, too.
A big one. Places like Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam. The source talks about past control through extortion, illegal lending, running opium dens and brothels.
Has that changed?
Government crackdowns, especially in Malaysia and Singapore, have reduced their public profile significantly. But their historical influence is undeniable, and they've certainly been present in Vietnamese cities with large Chinese populations.
So, with all this activity, what's being done to stop them? What about law enforcement?
Well, in Hong Kong, there's the Organized Crime and Triad Bureau, the OCTB. They specifically target these groups, working with other police units, doing raids, undercover work.
And legislation.
Hong Kong has specific laws. The Society's Ordinance outlawed triads way back in 1949. Then later laws brought in special investigative powers and tougher sentences for organized crime. And tackling police corruption via the ICCAF from 1974 was also key.
And outside Hong Kong.
Other countries obviously have efforts too. Canada's RCMP has an organized crime branch. Australia has the AFP. The source mentions concerns raised down in Australia about foreign governments potentially collaborating with criminal syndicates.
Really?
Yeah, referencing the Chow Tai Fook conglomerate and its alleged links to the 14K triad, and this figure, Wan Kukukoi.
Juan Kukoi. He's mentioned elsewhere, isn't he?
He is. The source names several notable triad figures. Wan Kukoi, known as Broken Tooth, from Macau. Chong Sekung, a big-time kidnapper and arms smuggler. Even a woman, Shi Ping, called the godmother of the Chongqing underworld. These names give a face to some of this history.
So wrapping this up, quite a journey we've taken through this source material. Key takeaways for you.
For me, it's that incredible evolution. From patriotic secret societies trying to overthrow an empire
Right?
to these incredibly adaptable, globalized criminal networks involved in everything from street crime to high-level financial manipulation and cyber fraud. Their history is just so tied up with broader political changes.
Absolutely. And for me, it's those connections, the alleged links to state actors, the cooperation with other major international crime groups like the Camorra.
Mm.
It shows how complex and interwoven these underground networks really are.
Yeah, deeply unsettling, some of those reported links. It really highlights the massive challenge law enforcement faces globally.
It really does. Which kind of leads us to a final thought for everyone listening. Considering how adaptable the triads have proven to be moving into cybercrime, like pig butchering, their reported state links, their cross-border collaborations,
Mm.
what does that mean for global security going forward? How do you even begin to tackle organizations that are so multifaceted, so transnational, and potentially so connected? It feels like a challenge that's only going to get more complex, doesn't it?
It certainly seems that way, a constantly shifting landscape.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.